Welcome everyone to the EL Civics COAAP Development webinar. If you would please type your name and that of anyone meeting with you into the chat box, I'd really appreciate it. Please type your name, your full name, please, first and last name. That would help me. And again, if you have not registered for this meeting, if you would go into the CASAS website and register, I would really appreciate it. That would help me out a lot because I would like to keep track of your registration. It's good for you also that you get counted as having attended the meeting. So if you would type in your first and last name of yourself and anyone who's sitting with you listening to the meeting, that would be great. So this meeting came out of a request from various agencies about learning a little bit more about EL Civics COAAP development. So I'm going to basically start from the beginning and talk to you about it. You may have questions, and I may not have covered everything in the slides, and I look forward to hearing your questions, and we'll try to answer them as best I can. I will send you these slides, and I will also send you the recording of this meeting, so I can do both of those things. So let's get started. So I want to start with the goals and objectives. So at the end of this session, participants will be able to demonstrate understanding of the EL Civic Objective and COAAP system. So I want to review that so you're aware of all parts of it so you can do your best in your development. And then also you will be able to participate in the process for revising or creating COAAPs, excuse me, if you wish to do that by the end of this. So if I'm going to ask you to just type into the chat your role at your agency. Are you an EL Civics teacher? You don't have to type your name again, but just so I know how many EL Civics teachers there are. If there are any CTE teachers, if you would just type that in the chat, that would help me. If you are an EL Civics coordinator, just type, again, the name of your position into the chat. If you're an administrator, director, that's great, just so I know who's here today. And if you're a staff member, please type in staff. That would be great. Thank you so much. Great, and I hope what I'm going to talk about today is helpful to all of you in all of your roles. And I know some of you are in multiple roles, and that's great too. It just gives me an idea. Okay, so I want to start at the very beginning again. There are 7 EL Civics competency areas: consumer economics, community resources, health, employment, government and law, transitions, and workforce training. The first 5 were part of the original EL Civics that started in the early 2000s. And then about 2 or 3 years ago, we added the transitions ones that really are a little bit more complex. We were trying to move towards college and career readiness, so we made them a little more complex. And then last year we added the workforce training because we are trying to connect EL Civics to workforce training. So those are our 7 competency areas. So in our competency areas, we have civic objectives, and here are some samples of some possible, or I shouldn't say some possible, some civic objectives that we currently have. In consumer economics, civic objective 2 is access community or commercial agencies to resolve a consumer complaint. In employment, civic objective 33, locate, analyze, and describe job requirements, licenses, credentials, etc. needed for specific jobs and identify resources available to help access the information. It's important for anyone wanting to develop a civic objective and additional assessment plan that they're aware of what's already available, because we are going to try to write your COAAP within a current civic objective if at all possible, and only if we don't have any civic objective that might meet that need, write a new civic objective. So it's important for you to be aware of the civic objectives that are currently there. And again, I talked about earlier in our last meeting, we talked about the pre-approved civic objective list. And it would be important for you to look at that, and I'm going to show you a sample of that. And here it is right here. So here is a section of the pre-approved civic objective list. I can again show you later where to get it. It is a PDF that's on the CASAS.org website. You go to CASAS.org, you go to California EL Civics, you go to Civic Participation, and then the first box has about 10 or 12 PDFs that are crucially important if you are new to EL Civics, or even if you're not. And in there is the pre-approved civic objective list, and this is it. This is a sample of it. On the left, you'll see, for example, for number 19, we have the competency area first here in the second column. Then we have the civic objective and the focus area, and then the list of language and literacy objectives that are the basis or the foundation for the EL Civics instruction and the assessment. So if you were going to write a new COAAP for Civic Objective 19, you'd want to take a very good look at what's here in terms of language and literacy objectives, see if they meet your needs, consider adding language and literacy objectives if necessary, and then write your assessment and plan your instruction around language and literacy objectives. Now, I just want to mention that only a few language and literacy objectives are linked to each COAAP, and that was to simplify it. Originally, we listed everything that could be a part of it or should be a part of the instruction, but we realized that it sort of weighed the assessment down. So then we pared it down to the language and literacy objectives that relate specifically. But again, remember that one of the requirements for EL Civics is 30 hours of instruction. So we hope that teachers will look to these language and literacy objectives to fill in the instruction that might be around the assessment that's taking place. An assessment may only take 15 hours to do the instruction for, and then those other 30 hours should be found in these other language and literacy objectives. Okay. So just as a reminder, what is a COAAP? A COAAP, again, the initial civic objectives and additional assessment plan. A COAAP is a performance-based assessment which assesses how well a learner can interact and access the community, interact with and access the community. So that's our purpose of EL Civics, is to interact and access the community. That's what we're hoping the student will be able to do. And that's why our assessments are either exact or simulations of community interactions, filling out a job application, having a job interview, for example. Each COAAP plan has 1 to 3 tasks for each level of learner, and the learners must complete those tasks in order to demonstrate what they've learned. And those of you who've done portfolios know that portfolios have 2 set additional tasks that must be done by all learners. So agencies are responsible for writing an assessment that matches the COAAP based on the language and literacy objectives, and then developing curriculum and planning instruction based on the language and literacy objectives as well. And that instruction should prepare the learner to pass the assessment. So everything that's in the assessment must be taught. It can't be a surprise to our students. So that's a very basic set of information. Okay, so here is a sample COAAP. Again, just to remind those of you who might be new, the COAAP tells the number. It gives you the civic objective up here at the top. It tells you what kind of assessment type it is, oral or written. And then it tells you the level range from beginning low to advanced, in this case for Objective 19, 19.8. And then it lists the language and literacy objectives that are specifically related to the assessment itself. Again, this could be a very limited list. In this case, there's 7 which isn't so limited, but in some cases there may be only 2 or 3 language and literacy objectives that relate specifically to the assessment itself. And as I said, there may be more used for the instruction. Here, just to show you a little bit more in depth, is task 3 of COAAP 19.8, and it's based on language and literacy objective 4, and that objective is list citizens and immigrants' rights and responsibilities. And then you'll see that it says demonstrate knowledge about immigrant rights, answer questions about immigrant rights. The student will be presented with 2 scenarios via pictures depicting immigration-related situations, and then they will answer questions about what's happening and what the right is being violated, or what the responsibility is for the student in that situation. So, as I said, the task must relate directly to the language and literacy objective. Okay, so I have a list here of the steps to revising or creating COAAPs. Remember that making a new COAAP may involve just revising what's already there. That's the easiest way to do it. Or if nothing is there that meets the needs of the students, then you would want to create a new one. So these are the steps. I'm going to just show them here on this slide 10, and then we're going to go over each of the steps individually to give a little bit more information. So here are the steps. First, assess the needs. Second, research match of existing civic objectives, language and literacy objectives, and tasks. So even if you're writing a new COAAP, creating a new one, there may be things in the current civic objectives that you can use as a base, and that will make it a lot easier for you. Once you've done your research, you'll want to identify what's there that you can use, or what you can revise, or that there's nothing there, you want to just create something new. So that's what you'll be looking at. Once you've identified it, then it would be great if you send me an email to let me know that you're planning on revising or writing a new COAAP, so that I can sort of get you in the queue, as they say. So I know how many people are going to be doing this, because I'm going to need to be able to sort of space you out so I have time to help all of you. And we have another program specialist coming on board in January that also may be able to help. So that will allow for that. So if I know how many of you are going to be doing it, it would be really helpful. Then you should think about what you want to be doing, and then send a brief summary of your civic objective, the language and literacy objectives, and the tasks. Again, you don't want to get too far into your planning before you run it by CASAS, because we may be able to steer you in one direction or another, or let you know that there's something already there that you perhaps missed. Once your sort of brief summary is approved, then you'll work back and forth with me and or other people at CASAS to help finalize it and get it posted. So let's go over anything I didn't talk about. Talking about assessing the needs. If you're going to be writing a 231 funded COAAPs, you want to assess the needs of your learners. You know, why are you writing a new COAAP? It should be based on the needs of your learners, that your learners have needs that aren't currently addressed in the current civic objectives and COAAPs that we have in our system. So you want to, if you're assessing the needs of your students, you're going to utilize the current list that we have, or add items that you've identified you think are important for your students, and perhaps are not on what the civic objective list that we currently have. If it's 233 funded that you're looking for, you're starting with an assessment of the workplaces in your community. The whole point of 243 and IE LCE is to get students jobs. So what kinds of jobs are there in your community? Do they need workers? If they do, what kind of training is needed to prepare students to work in those jobs? So do you already have training either in your own agency or a local agency that can be helpful? Or does new training need to be planned? If new training need to be planned, that's probably a longer process, but you want to start that process going. Then, once you identify what training is available or being planned, or then you want to assess the needs of your learners to see what they want to study. So there may, let's say, there may be a need for nurses in your community, but if none of your learners want to be nurses, then there's no point in you developing that career pathway. So then you want to assess, which of your students want to participate in the training, and then you develop your career pathway around what students' needs are. So that's assess needs. Any questions about assessing needs? Go ahead and put it in the chat, or you can open up your mic if you'd like to. Okay, and I do want to mention, I do understand that some of this information is information you may already know, but I'm hoping this is a consolidation of what you already know to prepare you to actually write a revised or new COAAP. We'll move on to the next slide. So research. Again, we want to know that there's a match or that if there's a match or similarity between existing ones and learners' needs. So if your learner has needs, are there already civic objectives that match? Are there already language and literacy objectives that match? Are there already tasks that match or are similar? Okay, because it's possible that you can use the task as is and just change the content so that you don't have to start from scratch. So you want to base your revisions or creations on existing ones if you can. Maybe there are language and literacy objectives that you can utilize in your new civic objective. When I was working with the immigration integration framework last week with one of the allies members, we noticed that some of the gaps that we had identified really could be easily addressed if we moved some language and literacy objectives from one civic objective to another. So there's a lot there, and I suggest it is 31 pages, so I hate for you to print it out, but I would like you to download it and look at it carefully, that list of pre-approved objectives and additional assessment plans. I'm sorry, list of pre-approved civic objectives, because there may be things there that you can either use verbatim or adjust to meet your needs. And we have a question: how often do programs usually assess the needs? It is required that that agencies assess at least once a year, and that's a community needs assessment that is required by IE Civics. In the past, agencies used to do it in the spring to be ready for the fall, but now anyone can do it anytime, but it is required that you do it at least once a year. You may want to do it more. Some agencies do a community needs assessment once a year of all their students, and then in each classroom, after, let's say, 10 civic COAAPs are selected, they ask the learners in the classroom which of these 10 do the students want to study that semester. That's usually for a 231 program. That's a further needs assessment, but only one is required. Is there a needs assessment for 243 on the CASA site? No, there is not one. And the reason is that, there are ones for 231 because that's general. And so we know that many people would be using it, but we don't really know what the job needs are in your community, and that's why we haven't put one out for workplace. But if anyone has done one and want to send it to us and put it out there as a sample, we can consider that. And I'll put it on my list as a possible development. Again, if we get some new funds, we might be able to do that. Marin asks about the link to the pre-approved civic objectives, and I will show that to you after I get through with this. I'll put it on my list, but you can find it on the CASAS website in the middle box of the IE Civics page. It's a PDF called Pre-Approved Civic Objectives List. Siobhan says, you said something about adjusting civic objectives, LNLs, and or tasks. Is adjusting different than revising? I'm sorry, no, I would say it's the same thing, adjusting or revising. Sorry if I confused you using a different word. Stacy put up the link, I guess, for pre-approved civic objectives list. Thank you, Stacy. And again, I would like you to, I mean, it's great to use the link, but I would like you to become familiar with what's on the page so that you can find it without having a link, because it's not going to some random place. It's all the links would be going right to our IE Civics page, and it would be great if you would familiarize yourself with the documents on there. That's going to be very helpful for you. Okay, moving on to slide 13. And thank you so much for your questions. I just want to mention that in terms of additional research you need to do for 243 funded COAAPs is how will, and that should say how will your plan, it's correct how it is. How will you plan contextualized English language instruction utilizing a single set of learning objectives for both IELCE and training? Remember that one of the questions that came up on the 17-18 IELCE development plan was, what are the single set of learning objectives? So you need to be looking at the course outline for training, seeing what the objectives are for that, and then matching your objectives to that and writing a COAAP to those objectives. That would be the point of creating a new COAAP to match a training class. If you're not going to match exactly those learning objectives, then probably there's no reason to write a COAAP. So this would be an important part to match your learning objectives. And I would assume that this will be a question for the 218-19 program plan as well, because that's a crucially important part of the federal funding. And the second thing to research is, and this was also part of the question that CDE was asking you on your plan last year, how will the learning activities in IELCE be organized to function cooperatively with training? So they want to see exact match from the support of the English class to what's happening in the training, so that students will be able to succeed in their training class. That is the purpose of IELCE of 243 funding. Okay, moving on. Revising COAAPs. So talking a little about revising, as Shaban mentioned, rather than creating, you can revise pre-approved COAAPs. You can go in and, on the lists and see what's already pre-approved, and then replace some tasks with ones from other related COAAPs. You can create new tasks and mix, a new task with one that's already there. And your new task doesn't have to be taken out of the air. It can be based on what's already there. So if you want to do a role play, for example, as a new task, you should look at a few role plays that are already existing and just pick it up and change the content. It would be so easy for you to do that rather than starting from scratch. Or at least use it to inform you what kind of thing is in a role play task. It'll just make your development so much easier if you base it on what's already there. And I would suggest that 95% of what you might do is already there in some form, and using it to assist you would be very helpful. So again, you can use a combination of new and replace tasks. Once you figure out which tasks you want to use or revise, then you'll be also needing to revise the rubrics and rating scale if needed. I also just want to mention that in revising what's already there, you want to make sure you're challenging each level of student. One time someone said they wanted to revise a COAAP, and they took, let's say, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. They took the easiest task from each of those COAAPs and put it together in a new COAAP. Well, that was not challenging to the different levels of students. I don't know what their purpose was, but it was not considered challenging enough. So there's usually a simpler task and a more advanced task, at least in any civic objective. So you want to make sure that there is at least some challenge in what you write, revise, or create new. Okay, and we have Michelle Dulea created a needs assessment for their program. Well, since we're talking about it, let me see if I can go there, Michelle, and I know I have to share it again, so let me see how to do that. I think I have to, there it is. I'm hoping I'm sharing now. So here's Michelle's agency's assessment. It's beautiful, I have to say. Student Career and Educational Needs Assessment. I hope you're seeing this. So they're asking them to choose their school site, their current program area. Let's see if it's going to let me go next. There we go. I just want to be sure, can someone tell me whether you're seeing that?
Yes.
Great, thank you
Yes,
so much. Great, thank you. Okay, and then what is your long-term educational goal? And a list. And again, you have the link so you can look at this more carefully. And then these are the career pathways that this agency, Sweetwater, is offering. So remember, this may or may not apply to you. And this looks like it's an online form, which is fabulous because then everything can be tallied online as well. So they have ornamental horticulture as one of their pathways, and within that, floral design and landscaping. And then they have design and visual media arts, and they have keyboarding, multimedia graphic design, multimedia video production. Residential and commercial construction. What I like especially about this is there's a visual, you know, whatever level, there's a visual, as well as the name of the training programs: building maintenance and repair, construction trades, construction worker, roofer, waterproofer. Business management, administrative professional, file clerk, keyboarding, typing certificate, child development, family services. These are a lot of pathways. And patient care. And health care administrative services, food service and hospitality. I'm going to go quicker now. Information support services, networking, welding, and materials joining. So that's why they wrote that one civic objective and additional assessment plan, which I think is 72. Professional sales and marketing. So, Michelle, can you come on the line and tell us, do you actually have all of these pathways, or are you hoping to see if you have students who are interested in these pathways? Do you want to give us a little information about your needs assessment? Can you unmute yourself? I don't know whether you have your mic or not. Let's see what Michelle says here. I'm having trouble seeing the chat. Let me see if I can get that. For some reason, I've lost the chat. So if Michelle, perhaps Michelle will share with us a little bit later, or I'm sure she would be happy to receive emails about that. And Michelle, maybe you want to put your email address in the chat if you don't mind getting questions. Okay, now I need to share again. Let's see here. Go to the share, there we go. Okay. Okay, and now can I see the chat? Let's see if I can, there we go. Okay, so here now I can see the chat. So Michelle said, okay. Michelle said she didn't have a mic, which we figured out. And Mary, oh, I see. You're connected to what Michelle sent, I think, and so you said this is what we used in our 243. And Mary says she's at Sweetwater also. She'd be happy to help anybody. Thank you so much, Mary, for putting your email address there. And Michelle says we only include the ones we offer at Sweetwater, so they have a very extensive program of what they offer. And certainly we would love to hear more about all of your ESL support for all these training classes. And thank you, Michelle. You gave your email address as well. Thank you so much. Okay, so that was a great plus. Mary said, no, this is how we selected our 243 classes. We only have 4. Okay, so they have 4. So this, you gave everything you could possibly have on your needs assessment, and then you narrowed it down to 4 different things. Great. And at future meetings, I think you'll hear more about that, which is great. Michelle and Mary will share more about this, and that would be great. Maybe we can share your needs assessment at our next IELTS Civics Network meeting. Okay, so I hope now you're seeing my slides again, and I'm going to move on to slide 15. And just to say, in terms of creating COAAPs, you can, oh shoot, let's see here, there we go. You can create COAAPs by identifying existing tasks that may be similar to ones you want to create and utilize rubrics from similar existing tasks. So you can do that. I mentioned that in the revising, but you can also do it for creating as well. In either situation, you can use what's already there. Okay. Once you do your research, then you'll want to identify, revise, and create. So you're going to then embark on a cyclical process of either identifying what's already there, revising what's already there, or creating new, a civic objective, language and literacy objectives, tasks. And remember, with the tasks, they should reflect the training skills learned if you're talking about 243. And then also, what are the language skills needed to succeed in training? As I mentioned, we're working on language here. So sometimes when we're talking about 243, we get a little caught up in teaching the skill. We don't want to teach the skill. That's for the training teacher to do, but we want to teach the language related to the skill the students will be learning so that they'll be more apt to be able to learn that skill. And then for 231, they're looking at the language skills needed in the community, of course. There we go. Okay. Oh, shoot. I keep, there we go. Oh, there we go. I'm sorry. I was trying to get the chat in a place where I could see it. Okay, so once you're embarking on this cycle, first, as I mentioned before, let me know you're going to do that, okay? So that would be helpful to me so I can gauge what kind of help will be needed, how much time will be needed to do these tasks. And then once you've let me know and you've done your research, et cetera, then if you would submit a brief summary. As I said, don't get too deep into it at first. You know, what's your civic objective? Is it one that's already there or a new one? What are your language and literacy objectives? Are they ones that are already there or new ones? And what are your tasks? What are you thinking of? And then get feedback about that. And once that brief summary gets approved and you're told to go ahead, then you're going to be in a back and forth system with CASAS, starting with me. I think if we work on it consistently, and depending on how many people decide to be doing this at the same time, it might take about 30 days. But again, what has happened in the past is that, you know, you send something to me, if I get, or when I get back to you, then sometimes it sits on your desk for a couple of weeks, and then it sits on my desk for a week or so because you've caught me at a time when I've gone to a conference or that kind of thing. So one thing we might want to do to make this go a little bit faster is to set up a time frame that you want to work with and set up appointments in that time frame. We can be a little bit more specific about that, and then I think that will make it go quicker. Certainly anything you want looked at needs to be, I would say, looked at by January, your brief summary, so that we can fit everybody in before the April 30th deadline. So at least let us know you're going to be doing it, even if you don't start right away. before January, and if you can have your brief summary in by January, that would be really helpful. Okay, I think most of these questions are between you all about links to this, so that's not for me. Okay, any questions about the plan up till now? What you have to do? Okay, let's move on. And again, feel free to ask questions anytime. I just want to mention about the different options that we have in our system. Oh, shoot, option 1, option 2, option 3. If the COAAP you develop will benefit other agencies, CASAS will submit it into option 1. That's why we have 10 new COAAPs, because agencies developed them, and then we decided that they were good for more than their own agency, and they got submitted into option 1. So we'll take care of that for you if it's for the benefit of the state. If you're writing a COAAP that's specific to your agency because for whatever reason you decided to use a certain rating scale that's not what we usually do or whatever, then you will be submitting it into option 2 if you're revising. And if you're creating a new COAAP, then you need to use option 3 because that allows you to put in the new civic objective, et cetera, et cetera. So if it's an existing civic objective, it would go into option 2 and considered to be a revision. If it's a new civic objective, it would go into option 3. Just so you know. And Margaret says, what range of scores should be included? I'm going to talk about scores in just a minute, Margaret, if you don't mind waiting. Okay. So now that we have the general information to you, I want to, as soon as I do this slide, I want to talk more specifically about certain aspects. I just want you to remember that if you're revising or creating a COAAP and submitting into option 2 or 3, you have to select it every year, whether you're going to use it or not, or you lose it in the system. So just remember, if you submit an option 2 or 3, you must select it every year. And if that causes your count to go over 10, then you just ask for permission about going over 10. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about resources. When you're developing your civic objective, again, I've asked you to look at the language and literacy objectives, the civic objectives, the tasks that are already available to you. You can find those on the pre-approved COAAP list on the CASAS website. But you should also look at the rubrics. Now, you can see the rubrics on each of the COAAPs you look at, but also on the website, under resources, are these 2 links, oral rubric samples and writing rubric samples. So these give you, it's a shorter document, maybe about 3 or 4 pages each, that show you the different kinds of writing rubrics that we have on the web, in the plans, and the different kinds of oral rubrics. So this might be helpful to you as to decide what kind of rubric you want to use. It saves you from flipping through all the COAAPs, which are now getting to be about 300, I would guess. And then just to show you what a rubric is, and to show you that this can be applied to many, many oral things. Utterance is appropriate, clear, complete, and has correct content. There may be errors, but they do not interfere with meaning. So this kind of 2-1-0 scale can be used for a lot of oral tasks. So it behooves you, rather than writing a new one, to see what's here and change it if needed. But the more general you make it, it's sort of better because your teachers are used to using these kinds of general rubrics, and then it's not confusing to them. They know what they're looking for because they've used them before. Okay, so that's a little note on rubrics. So I just want to go through a COAAP just to show you the parts of it again, make sure everybody's aware. So for example, Civic Objective 33, and here's the objective that's currently there. Remember that there are language and literacy objectives for each civic objective. Here are some samples of different ones. Remember that the star over here on number 10 is to show that it's a beginning low language and literacy objective. That doesn't mean that others can't study it, but they probably wouldn't be tested in this way on it, but a low beginning student could be. So if you want your COAAP to be for low beginning students, you need to have some starred language and literacy objectives so that they can and relate their tasks to those language and literacy objectives. The second large bullet here is about assessment types. Remember that currently we have these assessment types: oral, written, role play, portfolio, and observation checklist. You'll need to select one of those. If you have a new one, a new idea, we could consider that and add it to the list, but that would need to be added on the back end, so we would need to discuss that. So just remember, this is what's available. Just to mention, an observation checklist is when the assessor would watch someone doing something. We use it, for example, in CPR, watch someone go through the steps and check the checklist that they've gone through all the steps. We're also using it in the Serve Safe certificate, where you watch someone wash their hands and make sure they're check the list that they've gone through all the steps. That's what an observation checklist is. So on to slide 22. Again, talking about rubrics. They describe what a student needs to demonstrate in order to gain a certain score. So here's a task: identify jobs and job duties for beginning low students. And they need to respond to 2 questions. And then the rubric is: response is correct and comprehensible. If it is, they get 1 point. If it's incorrect, incomprehensible, or there's no response, 0. But just again, a sample of a rubric. So now to Margaret's question about rating scales. So this system is a little bit complex. I'm going to explain it to you how we do it in the general Civic Objective and Additional Assessment plans that we have done up until now. If you want to do it for your agency specifically, you could possibly change the system. If it's going to be done and everybody's going to use it, it would need to follow this system. San Diego Community College District, for example, does it their own way, and all of their COAAPs for which they've written are specific to their agency and are not on the pre-approved list. And that's fine if you can justify it, and they have justified the way they do it in their school, so that's great. But I'm going to show you how we do it. So remember that the rating scale has a high number, which are the total points possible, and those are the highest points any one student can score. And the points for each level are the score a student needs to achieve in order to pass the assessment. And there just happens to be, for our system, always a 4-point spread between the levels. That's just how our system works. It's a little arbitrary, but we have to make sure that there's a 4-point spread. So for example, in COAAP 16.5, there are 3 tasks. If you'll notice here in the middle, every student does every task. Every task is beginning low to advanced. So over here where it says points possible for each task, if you add up these numbers, 5, 18, 14, they will equal the total points possible, 37. And so then what happens is for this kind of assessment where all the students do all the tasks, let's see if I put it in on the next slide, just 1 second here. Yeah. So where we usually look at when everyone's doing all the tasks, the advanced students have to do 90%, the intermediate students have to do 80%, the intermediate low have to do 70%, the beginning high do 60%, and the beginning low do 50%. So that's what's expected when everybody's doing the same thing and there are no differentiations between what they do. Okay, so that's basically the system we use. You'll notice here in intermediate low, IL, the score is 24. 70% of the total, 37, is probably 25, but it got adjusted down to 24 because there needs to be a 4-point spread between intermediate high and intermediate low. The same thing on beginning high, 60% of the total points is the total points for BH31 is adjusted 1 point for the 4-point spread, and that's 20 points. And then 50% of the 31 points that a beginning low student could get is 15. So that's how we do it in general. Okay, and I have a question from Michelle. How do you come up with 10 points on the example? What about for an advanced student? How would that look? I'm sorry, Michelle, I don't understand. Where are the 10 points that you're talking about? Can you please clarify your question? Okay, and I'm going to go on until Michelle does that. Oh, okay, here, oh no, let's see. She did that. Yeah, okay. Oh, I'm sorry, you said you are explaining the 4-point spread now. Okay, I'm still unclear. Were you talking about a previous slide? Let me go back and look if that's going to help. How do I come up with 10? I don't see 10 anywhere, so I'm so sorry. Hopefully you will tell us what you're asking if you still need it. Okay, I want to show a different kind of rating scale, and this is for COAAP 12.7. Please note that not all levels do all tasks, and this is where a lot of people get confused because they add up all the points and they can't find why 33 is the answer. So the reason 33 is the answer here is because the total points possible is the points that any one student can get. The student that always gets the highest points is the advanced level student. So if you look at the scores that an advanced level student can get, in task 2 they can get 13, and in task 3 they can get 20. That equals the 33 total points possible. Task 1, only beginning low and beginning high students do. So that's the system here. So that's why there's 33, and then if you start looking at different percentages of what students are doing, that's how you get the rating scale here. And I'm going to show you on the next slide how we figure the rating scale with percentages when not all students are doing all tasks. But before I do that, I'm going to look at Michelle's question again. So a beginning high needs only 20 points to pass, and 33 is needed to pass for an advanced student. So that was on the previous slide. Let's go back and look what she's referring to. 33 is needed to pass for the advanced student. That is correct. And 20 points are needed for the beginning high to pass. That is correct. Are you saying that's not a 4-point spread? I'm confused. There's 4 points between 29 and 33. There's 4 points between 24 and 29, and there's 4 points between 20 and 24. That's the 4-point spread between levels that I am referring to on this slide 25. Yelena asks, isn't it possible that then that beginning students can just do 2 tasks and pass the entire assessment? So we need to guard against that, Yelena. All the tasks have been set up so students cannot do only 2 tasks and pass. So I'm not showing you 16.5 here completely, but if you looked at 16.5, I would hope that what the students need to do makes them need to do all tasks in order to get 15 points. If that's not the case, we should change it. And as you are developing your COAAPs, you need to make it so that they need to do all the tasks in order to get the 15 points. So it is intended that they do all the tasks, and it is intended that the rubric makes them do it. The rating scale makes them do it by requiring a high enough number of points that would make them do all the tasks. And sometimes that's a little difficult, but it should be true. If you know of a COAAP where it's not true, let me know and I'll try to adjust it. But students need to do all the tasks that are assigned to them for their level. Okay, so let's move on now. Okay, so I want to point out to you that when you're writing rating scales, you want to consider this, or this is how we do it. When 3 levels do the same task items, we assume that they are basically being given the same questions. So, and if they're not being given the same questions, then you would want to adjust this. But if they're given basically the same questions with perhaps an additional question for them, because the test, we assume, is aimed at the middle level. When you have a test for 3 levels, it's aimed at the middle level. So we normally expect a student to get 80% right on a test to have a good test, 80 to 85%. So if the test is written for the middle level, then it's going to be easier for the higher level to get that score. So that's why we require a higher percentage right. And if that test is written towards the middle level, then it's going to be harder for the lower level to get a good score. So we only require 70%. So this is how we look at scoring, or percentages for the rating scale. So that's what I wrote here in the note. It is assumed that the task or test is the same, aimed toward the middle level, so they should get 80% right. It will be easier for the higher level, so they should get 90, and harder for the lower level, so they should get 70%. That's how we look at our test rating scale in general. And again, you can decide to do it differently, and you would just need to justify how you're doing it. So when 2 levels do the same task, again, we usually expect, that it's written in such a way that the top level would have to do 80% and the lower level 70%. That's how we look at it. Okay, so that's our rubric rating scales, basically everything you need to know about developing a COAAP. Any questions about the development and rating scales, rubrics, tasks, those kinds of things? So I have a couple of questions here. Let's see. Okay, is the level of students strictly determined by the COSAS reading score? And the answer is no. The level of students is determined by the ESL Adult Education Standards, which you can find on the COSAS website. The levels are described, beginning low, beginning high, intermediate low, intermediate high, and advanced. They are not related to the COSAS reading scores. So you need to go and look at what the model standards for adult education ESL are and match it towards that. That's what it's relating to. Do all the COAAPs generally have 3 tasks? So most of them have 2 tasks, actually. Some of the older ones have 3 per level. So we tried to limit it in the revisions in 2004, 2005. We tried to limit the number of tasks so it wasn't so onerous to 2. So I would suggest you think about 2. Sometimes you may feel you need a 3rd task, but remember, you do not have to assess everything you teach. So lots of things can be taught. You don't have to assess them. The assessment is just to demonstrate performance. So I would advise you to stick with 2 per level of student, just to make it easier for you and easier for your students. Try to make those tasks as far-reaching as possible. And when I say that, I mean, for example, in 33, when you have to, the student has to fill out a job application. There are a lot of steps in filling out a job application. There's a lot of language and literacy objectives involved in filling out a job application. There's personal information, there's educational information, there's job history information, there's reference information. All of that takes a lot of instructional time. And so an assessment where the student would need to fill out a job application takes a lot of instructional time. So that's great. So it's wonderful to be able to demonstrate everything the student learned in a task, but it's not often the case that you can do that. But try to make it as far-reaching as possible so that you are demonstrating what the student has learned in general, if that's at all possible. But again, don't make it too onerous for you or the student. You don't want to assess every single thing the student learned, unless it can be done in one place, like a job application, then that works. Question. Let's see, I don't want to miss one. Let's see. Sorry, okay. Are agencies able to use their own criteria? Sorry, Marcy. Is the level of student strictly determined? Okay. Or are agencies be able to use their own criteria? So as I mentioned, it's not your own criteria. It is the level designated by the model standards for adult education for ESL. And I can show you that document on the website when we're finished with the slides. Okay, now Jennifer asks, 13.6 for IL can take 2 of the 3 task assessments and still, okay, thank you. So I will look into 13.6. Thank you so much. I will look into that. Okay, when looking at the rubric for the interview for 33.7, the total adds up to 25, but I can't figure out how to get to 25. Okay, so Shannon, why don't you contact me separately about that? I don't want to take everybody's time with that now, but I will be happy to help you. Tamika asks, have the model standards been aligned to the CCRS? The model standards are from 1992. And they are basic descriptions of what a student needs to do. They have not been aligned to the CCRS. The CCRS doesn't have levels. First of all, they're not written for English language learners. And they don't have levels beginning low, beginning high, etc. They're A, B, C, D, E. So I have a correlation list I can show you so I guess the answer is yes. I can show you a list that does that. Okay. Okay. Liz says, some of the advanced level tasks involve writing a multi-paragraph essay. Is it possible to have the students complete this in the steps of the writing process? Yeah. So, or students need to complete the essay in one sitting. So this is an issue. You need to consider that. It can go over days if it needs to. It doesn't need to be done in one sitting, but the only issue with that is our students showing up on multiple days, etc. So it is a little bit of a problem. And the other thing would be that no one is, if students go away and come back, that they're not bringing in something that someone else wrote. So those would be the concerns. So you might want to shorten the task or have it be a longer class. It depends on your class size. So you would want to write or select, if you're not writing, select tasks that fit in with the time frame you have for the assessment and make sure that students will be able to complete it in the time in a way that makes sure that they haven't had help from someone else. That's a good question. Okay. Do you advise that we adjust the various level assessments so that they are level appropriate even when lower level students need lower scores to pass the test? Or should we use the same assessment for all levels? So you need to look at how it works for you, but I think having it be level appropriate is more useful to the students because then you're matching their needs and challenging them. Then you might want to look at changing your percentages to match that if you think it makes it harder and you need to look at 85% or 80% for everyone because you've made it all level appropriate for each one. That works also. I'm just showing you how we've done it in the past and how these COAAPs were originally written. I was just trying to point that out to you. But yes, if you're doing everything in a level appropriate way, you may want to adjust the rating scale so that it's 80 to 85% for each level. Okay. If you're writing to people specifically, if you could, I think you can do it rather to everyone, just write to them specifically. It would really be helpful to me not to have everybody's private conversations on the chat, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you so much. Okay, so I want to move, we have, let's see, we have a half an hour left in our training, and I wanted to give you some information that might be helpful to you and give you some examples of what's been done. So, and again, I hope this is helpful to you, and we can always talk further, but this is just sort of the basic information I thought would be helpful. So I just wanted to remind you about the goals for IE LCE instruction for this year, 2018-19. It were the same goals that were last year, of course, and this is for the 243 funds. The goal is to link Civics instruction and assessment to career pathways by including instruction and assessment tasks that directly relate to training. So it's important that whatever COAAPs you write, identify a single set of learning objectives. In other words, the objectives that are in the training are the same objectives that you're using for the English language training. I'm going to give you an example. So that may mean that you, in order to make that happen, that you add tasks or replace tasks to COAAPs that are already existing, or write new COAAPs that directly relate to the training models of IET. And this may be in the format of alternating teaching, where an ESL class is supporting a training class every other day, for example, or happening in the same classroom, which is co-teaching. So this is, again, the goal of IE LCE instruction. And I want to give you some examples. So this is one of the objectives for a child development course that was happening at Mission College. So on completion of the course, the student should be able to orally and in writing introduce children at various stages of development and objectively describe their physical appearance. So the language and literacy objectives that were written to be objectives that match that were these three. And you can find them in 70.5, but they're part of all the language and literacy objectives in Civic Objective 70. Identify a child's personal information, such as name, exact age, native language. Describe a child's development and or behavior, such as abilities, interests, routines. Write an objective and detailed description of a child. So you'll notice there's not a one-to-one correspondence in that each objective matches exactly. And the reason is because we want our language and literacy objectives to relate to a number of different sets of instruction or courses. So we don't want to take the exact language and literacy objective, but the exact course objective, but we want to show a correspondence to that thing. In other words, in order to complete this student course objective number 1 here above, they would need to do the 3 things below, the 3 language and literacy objectives. I hope that's clear. So you could use the same one, but then the only people that would be using the objective would be taking that specific course. So we would like our language and literacy objectives to be general in order to span different courses in different agencies in California. And that's why ours are written a little bit differently. But they still are a single set of learning objectives because it's a set. It doesn't have to be a one-to-one correspondence. Did someone come on and is not muted? Please mute yourself, or I will see if I can mute you. There we go. Okay. I don't think there are any questions about that. Let's see. Yes, I think I do have a question. Someone put up the link to the model standards. Thank you so much. And I can show you these documents when we're done. Okay, from Jennifer. With COAAPs' encouragement of students performing certain aspects of the assessments digitally, are teachers allowed to offer support for the digital piece while students complete the content part of the assessment alone? So we do want to encourage digital literacy, and again, that's a WIOA encouragement, and then translated from the California Department of Education to the work that COAAPs does. So it's not COAAPs specifically, just want to mention that. So you're saying that you don't want to teach them how to use digital literacy, but that you're going to have them use it when they don't know how to use it, so you'd have to help them. So I don't think that's the aim. The aim would be to encourage learning the digital skills also. So from the beginning, Civics we were not allowed to teach computer skills as part of it. But the way we were able to teach computer skills was to say that the student needed to email something. So in order to email something, they had to learn how to email something, so we had to teach digital skills. But we weren't testing that. So we couldn't assess the digital skills, but we could say they needed to email something. So if you're not going to teach the digital skills, I would suggest you not include that in your assessment. But I would say that why don't you take the opportunity to teach those digital skills, because it's a requirement of your COAAP. And I hope that answered the question, and we can talk more about that individually if you'd like to call me or contact me at a different time. Okay, so I just wanted to mention, so looking back at the language and literacy objectives here that are a single set of learning objectives to this child development course, for example, here we have task 70.5, task 1, COAAP 70.5, task 1, and it says using an agency-created information sheet or after working with a child, student will introduce a child and provide information about the child in writing, for example, including up to 8 elements and name, exact age, native language, so you can see how it matches the learning objective in the training course. So that's all I was trying to point out here, that you want to, this is how you have a single set of learning objectives required by the WIOA grant. And we have another question. Okay, so Jennifer, let's talk more about the digital skills. Well, maybe we need to bring it up. So she said, Jennifer says, I mean, during assessments, offering support with the digital piece, we would obviously pre-teach and practice the digital skills. So I think I need to consider this farther, but we always want to produce a real-life situation. So if the real-life situation requires digital skills, then the students need to learn those digital skills. It's part of the assessment. So in order to complete the assessment, they have to do all the pieces. Again, if you're not going to require competency in that, you shouldn't include it. But if you say the student needs to write an email, then they have to have the skills, and part of the assessment is that they can do the digital part of it. So Margaret says, so if we develop something for accounting, then we don't assess the math portion, but more of the language and vocabulary needed to understand and explain the subject. Yes, that is correct. We're not teaching math. We're teaching the language that student needs to learn the math. Thank you so much. So let's move along. Oh, so this is an example I've used before. It's not the greatest example, but just to show you, this is some of the curriculum for the personal care assistant and caregivers that Donna Price does or has done at San Diego Community College District. And she shared this set of curriculum and skills a student needs to have. So I took this and thought, okay, some of the main things a student needs to do is to be able to use good body mechanics, okay, and know the infection control and be able to take vital signs, these skills over here on the left-hand side. But as we talked about before, these are all the skills, not the language necessarily. So what the ESL teacher needs to do is find the language in these that the student needs to do in order to learn these skills and effectively use them once they get a job. So I thought of writing 243 designated COAAPs that coincide with this, and write the tasks and assessments and plan the 30 hours of instruction. So I just made a sample. This is not in real life, but I made a sample of what could be written, for example, for infection control. So I wrote a language and literacy objective: identify, demonstrate, communicate about, and utilize strategies to control infection. So again, it has to be language oriented. So they are going to demonstrate and describe orally or in writing about hand washing techniques. So they have to do the hand washing, but the language part of it is that they can describe orally. So if their supervisor said, you know, what are the steps of hand washing? You know, you haven't completed them all, let's say, if they gave them a problem. Oh, and the student could say, oh, yes, I did. First, I did this. Second, I did that. Third, I did that, et cetera, et cetera. So number 2, report to a supervisor about the steps taken to control infection. So that's the language. So to set the skill in the language needed to report to someone or to describe it for someone is one way that you could translate a skill into your English language support. So for good body mechanics, again, demonstrate, describe orally, and you can notice that these are pretty similar, right? Because it's hard to put these skills into language. But then the task 2 is a little different: communicate effectively with patients before, during, and after. So not only do you have to learn how to lift as a personal care assistant, but you have to learn how to talk to your patients. I'm going to lift you now. Please move your legs to the right, or whatever would have to be said. That can be taught and assessed. The third one, similar. Identify, taking vital signs, again, being able to describe the steps, and then communicating with the patient before, during, and after. So you'll notice they're very similar, but this is one way to think about how you can develop COAAPs for training areas. And Carla says, can you please share these slides? And yes, I will. I'm happy to send the slides out. I will actually send them to the whole network as soon as we're done, and I will also send you the YouTube version so you could watch this again if you wanted to, or share with someone else. Okay, just moving on in general, I just wanted to mention that there are 4 new objectives, and these are the training objectives that are there now. Notice that we're going to be number 72 and 73 relate directly to the industry sectors. So probably when we were doing 70 and 71, we didn't really think about that, but probably now we want to have them written in the industry sectors. So these are the list of industry sectors. We already have ones written for building and construction trades, the ones in green: education, child development, health science and medical technology, and information and communication technologies. So although we can have more COAAPs in these, we would love to have some COAAPs in some of these other industry sectors as well, because eventually we would love to be meeting the needs in all the industry sectors, because in the state, all these industry sectors are represented, we hope. So I just wanted to put this for you here. So again, we'll probably be trying to generalize our civic objectives to match these industry sectors. So right now we have 10 new pre-approved COAAPs, and they are in the area of child development, personal care, building and construction trades, digital technology, and then we have added 53.1, which is navigate work and school environment and rights, and deals with discrimination. So we had one agency write this one. It's really great that now we have something about discrimination, and we were very pleased because we noticed that's one of the immigrant integration framework areas that was thought not to be addressed, but now that we have this 53.1, we are addressing that area. So we are finding that there's about a 95% correspondence now with the immigrant integration framework. So and that list of correlations will be out on the next few months, I think. Oh, this is very poor. It doesn't show up very well. So sorry, but some of you saw it earlier, and I can send a better version. Before I send you the slides, I'll make a better version of this. I'm not sure I can actually, but I will try. It's just a list, a demonstration of the IELTS Civics COAAPs that correlate to immigrant integration. As I said, there's about a 95% correlation now, and there will be a list coming out that shows the correlation. What you see in green and yellow here are the COAAPs that relate to the supporting objectives of the immigrant integration framework. And I'll get you a better slide. Okay, then in working with immigrant integration, just want to let you know, and also you may be wanting to develop in these areas, that these are the areas that we think need development. The census 2020, and I'm going to be going ahead and developing a COAAP for 2020 because it's so crucially important that we get moving on that right now. So I'm going to be developing that one. Interestingly, we don't have any civic objectives or COAAPs, except for DMV, in navigating transportation resources. So if any of you are interested in doing that, we would love you to develop in that area. I was just musing that perhaps it's because by this time our students get to us, they already know how to use the bus or whatever transportation they've gotten to our agencies. And so agencies haven't felt the need to write in that area. Certainly all ESL textbooks deal with it, but there are no COAAPs in reading bus schedules or those kind of things, which is certainly a basic transportation area. So if you are interested in writing in that area, or if you have input for me, why you think we don't need it, I would love to hear that too, because we don't want to be writing something that people are not going to use. So if you think it's needed, I'd love to hear from you. What the content might be that is needed, we'd love to hear from you. Again, we think it's related to, reading bus schedules or going online to digitally get information, perhaps using apps now that you can find out when the bus is coming. Maybe that's useful to students, or do they already know how to do all that because they take public transportation to our agencies? That's the question. Anyways, that came up. Consumer education, of course, we have consumer education, but thinking critically about print and online sources of information, that's not there. So we would love to have a COAAP written in that area. Again, we want to try to have a one-to-one correspondence with the immigrant integration framework if we can. And those three areas are missing. The second main bullet here about Civic Objective 1, banking is incredibly outdated. It deals with writing a check and filling out a deposit form. We really need to update it related to digital banking, online banking, using a banking machine, those kinds of things perhaps. And the immigrant integration framework talks about expense reduction. We do have budgeting in banking, but we don't have expense reduction. And that's something that they would very much like us to add. So we're going to be thinking about that. If that's of interest to any of you, we would love to have your input on that. Again, except for the census, it's really hard for CASAs to write new civic objectives because we don't know the needs of your students. So if you have students who are in need of these things, that would be great, either to let us know what the need is and the content of the need, and then we might be able to write it, or if you're willing to write it, that would be great. Personally, I'm hoping that if we do get any funding from AB 2098, and that's not sure, that we might be able to, help agencies with funding that could support teachers or coordinators writing new COAAPs. So we'll have to see about that. And the other thing we're doing to correlate the COAAPs to the immigrant integration network is just to add some new language and literacy objectives to various civic objectives. Most of them are already there. We found them in other places and we're just going to move them. But there are some new language and literacy objectives that could be added to match more closely with the framework. So I just want to share with you what we're doing with that. And now we are to the end of the slides I prepared for you, but we still have about 9 minutes. So if there's any questions, I would be happy to answer them. If not, I will take you to these documents I wanted to show you. So I'm going to just go there now, and then if I see your questions, I will answer them. Uh-oh. I think that's okay. Let's see. I hope you are still there. I just have to go here, across this home page, and then I think, here we go. I'm going to share with you again, CASA's homepage. Here we go. So now I'm getting the hang of this. Here we go. So you should be seeing the CASA's homepage, and I'm going to make it very large. And then just reminding you down the left-hand side, for everything EL Civics, you start over here. First of all, CASA's homepage, www.casas.org. Now on the left-hand side, you scroll down to California EL Civics. Click on that. Now again on the left-hand side of this page, you go to California Civic Participation. And then here is everything you need to understand California EL Civics. This first bullet here, pre-approved additional assessment plan list, is where you can find all of the COAAPs. Okay, so you can just go here and look at them. You hit the number here and hit go, and it takes you to all the COAAPs. So it would be good to identify in general what you're looking for, so you can go in the general area, you know, the consumer education, law and government. So probably look in the areas, but you can find everything here. It would behoove you to start with the pre-approved civic objectives list, which is here in the first box. It's a PDF. I'm going to download it. I showed it to you. Oh, I showed it earlier. So here's the list. And this is easy to scroll through. So when you're starting your research, it'd be great for you to start with this document, because this document doesn't show you the COAAPs, but it shows you all the civic objectives and all the language and literacy objectives. So you might understand that if you find language and literacy objectives that match what you're trying to do, you'll find it in the COAAPs under Civic Objective 1, for example. And as I said, this is a 31-page document. You might want to print it out so you can mark it up. It might be worth the paper to have as a resource as you start your research. Okay, the model standards was another document. And again, we can send you links, but I'd love for you to know what's on here so that you can find it anytime. If you scroll down to resources, the model standards document. Here it is, California ESL Model Standards, 1992. Okay, there we go. And if you go here, ESL Model Standards document. Looks different than I remember. Oh, here it is. Okay, so, and it is, since it was done in 1992, it was not digital at the time, so it is a print version online, copied page for page. So, but you want to scroll through it and look at the levels. Let me see where the levels are. I'm going to scroll through. Oh, there we go. So here we go. ESL, sorry, it's a little hard to do it online here, but so here's the beginning low level. It tells you what students are able to do in work, in listening, in speaking, in reading and writing, and in comprehensibility for each level. And then later in the document, so it does this from beginning low to advanced. I think literacy is here too. Sorry for the scrolling. And then later in the document, it details each of these areas, the course content that would be for each of these levels. So these are the levels we're talking about when we talk about beginning low, beginning high. I did say I was going to show you a correlation chart, and now that I think of it, the correlation chart might be related to the COAAPs test, but I think, let me look at it real quick in my own, see if I can find it. There we go. Yeah, okay. Let me share here. And I can send this to you. Don't know why. Okay, whoops. Oh, shoot. Sorry. Oh, shoot. It's, for some reason, it's not letting me do all this. There we go. Let's see if I can do it now. Okay, so this is a chart. It's not official. Comes from Patsy Egan, but it shows the educational functioning levels. So actually, you could go to the educational functioning levels for ESL that recently came out, and those would be similar to the levels that you should be looking at in terms of, because those would match more closely to the model standards, and these are correlated to the corresponding CCRS levels. So these are the levels we're talking about. So the reading scores do correlate to some extent, but the reason I originally said don't use that is because you're only testing one thing, reading, and so that would correlate to one part of a low beginning ESL student's level, but not necessarily their whole skills. The NRS levels and the model standards deal with the whole student, his listening, speaking, reading, and writing in combination, and that's what you want to look at, not just their reading score. So hopefully that's a little bit more clear, and I'm happy to talk to you a little bit more about that, and I'm happy to send you this chart, although it is not an official chart, just so you know, because nothing has come out officially from the federal government or our state government about this, but it is what we practitioners think works and matches. So let me go to the chat again and see, and we just have 2 minutes left. Oh my gosh, there's lots of questions now all of a sudden. So let me see if I can answer any of these in these last 2 minutes. And I'm happy to go a little bit over if you'd like to, but I don't want to keep you. Do COAAPs have to be tied to an ESL course? In other words, in the IBEST model, could you have an ESL instructor teaching the related COAAP in a CTE course, or do the COAAPs have to be taught? No, in IBEST, it's co-teaching. So the COAAP can be taught in an IBEST course. That means you have an ESL teacher and a CTE teacher in the same classroom. Where can we find the oral and writing rubric assessment sample documents? They're on the COAAPs website. In this, just scroll down under resources. I showed you how they looked in that slide, and you'll be getting that slide. Is there any discussion about creating stackable pathways? I attended an IBEST workshop, and their outcomes are based on many classes stacked in a pathway. Rarely do they expect someone to take one class, get a certificate, and become employable. Is this being discussed? Again, this would be a question for your CDE consultants, but I don't think our classes require a one-class certificate, although I do think the federal government was hoping for that in the way they set up the program. But you certainly can have a pathway with an elongated class setup. For example, we've talked before about pharmacy tech, for example, which is a 2-year program. Again, I think the federal government was hoping for, one-to-one correspondence, but it doesn't need to be. Our system does not require that. But our system does require the ESL support for whichever part of it you're trying to get funds. Natalia says, I think they changed standards now. We use college and career readiness for ESL. Okay, so there are no college and career readiness for ESL standards. There are the ELPS standards, but they don't identify what the student can do. The closest thing now would be the NRS educational functioning levels. So let me look at those and see how they correlate. Again, this system was originally done 15 years ago when we did not have the ELPS, and we based it on the ESL model standards for adult education, which we showed you. And I can look at it and see about the correlation to the current English language proficiency standards, or more than that, to the NRS educational functioning levels. The NRS educational functioning levels are the ones that we use to develop our tests. Anyone, not just COSAS, but TABE and all the other tests use those. So we can look and see how closely those match. But just to tell you, originally, it was all based on the model standards. And in order to have a correlation to the system, they probably should continue to be, but I will look into that, and that's a good question. Thank you. The model standards will not be revised, just to tell you. Okay, model standards. Okay, we've come to 3:32. Thank you so much. I hope this was helpful for you. I hope that you will write to me and let me know if you are going to be developing any COAAPs. I want to share with you my last slides, which, if I can find the link here, I will do that, which are just to say, let me just tell you, there it is. Finally came up again, new share. Here we go. Just to show you that we have, hopefully by the end of the session, you are now able to demonstrate an understanding of the IELTS Civic Objective and COAAP system, and hopefully you will participate in the process for revising or creating COAAPs. Don't forget to send me an email, lbhoward@cosas.org, if you're planning to do that. And I hope you will share this information with any administrators, teachers, TOPS for Enterprise staff, and others that this would be useful for, and feel free to share the recording or the slides when I send them to you. Thank you so much for your participation. I really appreciate it. And again, let me know if it was helpful to you or if you can suggest any additions or revisions. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.